Okay, we're going to go ahead and hop right in. So good morning. My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network, a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. In addition to the advising training and business information that the local SBDC offices provide, we offer specialty programs such as the International Business Development Program, or the IBD. The IBD program works with established firms to enhance their global success. Our certified global business professionals provide confidential advising, training, and customized research to help companies mitigate risk, prioritize markets, identify financing, and grow export sales. The Virginia SBDC IBD program has helped hundreds of Virginia companies from a variety of industry sectors to enter markets around the world. Today's webinar, Trade Talk, the Role of Customs Brokers, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network IBD program. We are recording today's presentation, and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted and the chat feature is turned off. But if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Chris Van Orden, International Trade Assistance Director.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this first edition of Trade Talk, a new monthly webinar series from the Virginia SBDC's International Business Program. As Sheila mentioned, my name is Chris Van Orden. I'm the Assistant Director for the IBD program for the SBDC at George Mason University. The IBD program provides counseling, training, and research services to Virginia's small business community looking to explore global markets. Today's conversation is going to be just free-flowing on the role that customs brokers play in the trade ecosystem. You can enter any questions that you might have in the Q&A function. Please, not the chat. The Q&A function is just easier for us to manage, and we'll do our best to answer them all either during or immediately following the webinar. So I'm very excited to welcome today's speaker, Sean-Marie Giroux, founder and chief trade strategist at Trade Moves LLC. Sean is a licensed custom broker, certified custom specialist, and CGBP. With her team, Sean helps companies of all sizes manage their global sourcing, logistics, and supply issues with a specialization in the food and beverage industry. Welcome. Thank you so much, Sean.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. Really appreciate it, especially being our inaugural guest. We brought in a ringer from the beginning, so really.
All right, let's hit it out of the park.
So before we kind of dig into the nuts and bolts of customs brokerage, can you just share a little bit of your background, how you came to work in the field of international trade?
Yeah, sure. I think trade's always been in my blood. I've lived around the United States, so traveling and wanting to be in different places was always something of interest to me. Went to school and studied international relations. Ended up going and living overseas in Moscow for a couple of years, and then working for the U.S. Embassy and then for Amica Oil Company. And I knew then that international was always going to be part of my life. I came back to DC, started working in trade for an automotive company, and really working on market access issues for U.S. made cars into overseas markets, especially Japan and right-hand drive markets. And really got a bug there working on trade policy and trade policy issues. Ended up doing my MBA and going to China to study for a semester, and then working for a consultancy that worked on trade issues. And we worked mostly on trade policy, but also customs compliance. And when that firm shut down, that my boss at the time wanted to get close to retirement, I started my consultancy. And in doing that, I became a licensed customs broker because I knew it was something I needed to do to have to be able to really work at that intersection of trade policy and trade operations from a compliance perspective. So that's sort of the journey. And Trade Moves was started about nearly 20 years ago now, working at that.
That's great. I didn't realize that you all have been around that long. And how big is your team these days?
So right now we are four. Typically we are 4 to 7, and depending on our workload. But right now we've got folks who are CGBPs. We have folks who are pursuing their licensed customs broker studies to become a broker. So we have folks, and we have alumni that have gone on to work in this space as well. So
Yeah, love it. It's a great team, and yeah, they're always impressed with the folk that you have on your side. So today's conversation, we're talking about the role of customs brokers. Some of our audience might never have engaged with a broker, or maybe have only heard things and maybe heard maybe not entirely accurate information. So can you give us a quick definition of what a broker does, and maybe even more importantly, what they don't do? Are there things that they may provide, but not always? Just a little bit of a rundown of what is a
yeah.
broker?
It's a good starting question. And I think even before I tell you what a broker does, I think just to level set on what customs authorities,
Mm.
expect, and and where they work, and then how a broker fits in there, and sort of that liaison position. So for customs authorities will have 3 pillars to trade, right? They'll have the enforcement of customs regulations. They'll have the facilitation of legitimate trade, and making sure that that trade can cross borders. And then they have the collection of duties. And a lot of countries really rely on those import duties to help build up their treasury. So customs brokers are here in the United States are licensed by Customs and Border Protection to conduct what's called customs business on behalf of importers. And so they act as that intermediary to ensure that that importers comply with customs regulations, that they're helping to facilitate that legitimate trade and make it easy for customs to clear those goods, and then make sure that the appropriate duties are paid. So that's really the role of a customs broker. They are they're really working, again, you'll hear me use the word intersection a lot, but that intersection of the compliance side and that trade facilitation side. And they're regulated and empowered by CBP to act in this regard. So you must get licensed. So you'll hear me sometimes say customs broker, other times you'll hear me say LCB or licensed customs broker. But it is a process in which you have to pass an exam, you have to have a security check, you have to have your fingerprints taken, because there's this responsibility that you have on behalf of your importing clients to make sure that you are paying the appropriate duty, you're facilitating those payments, you're doing what is expected by customs to enable that transaction to clear customs. I will say that brokers can be individuals like myself. They can be organizations like customs brokerage houses. And so they come in all different shapes and sizes. We, for instance, at Trade Moves, although I am an LCB, I don't actually clear customs for my clients. I will work with a customs brokerage house and work with my clients, but we don't always do we don't work on the transaction side. We work on the strategy side. And so but a customs broker, in short, is empowered by CBP to help facilitate. I will say that, what do they not do? That was a good part of the question. Brokers are typically not the importer of record, right? The brokers are your facilitator. They're an external service provider. They're there to help facilitate. They are not the importer of record. If you are importing the product, you are the importer of record, and the expectation by customs is that you are taking all the reasonable care and have informed compliance to bring that product in. And so that's what a broker is going to help you do. I will say that a broker is also, they're not trade lawyers, but many trade lawyers are brokers, and many consultants. They can be strategic advisors for you, but really their responsibility is to assist with those transactions and assist internal teams with filing entries and ensuring that they have a compliant program. For SMEs, a broker really is, in my perspective, is an extension of sort of your import-export team, your logistics team. They're going to be someone who's going to be an asset for you to help you understand some of the nuances of customs regulations. Um, I think they play an important role. And I'm hoping that one of the takeaways from today is that we see that the role of the broker can be very beneficial to SMEs, so that they ensure that they're being good actors and being seen as doing what's right when they bring in a product.
Yeah, yeah, that is very helpful to know, right? Even when you're engaging, customs broker, knowing they're not going to be doing this for you. They may not be the ones arranging the actual shipment, right? They may have connections with freight forwarders, or is another step in the process of moving product from one market to another. But right, just realize there's a suite of people, each of whom have their different areas of expertise, and customs brokers, right, have a very important skill set and a very important role to play here.
Yeah. Just to build on that, I will say that you mentioned freight forwarders. Some freight forwarders may have a broker on
Mm-hmm.
staff who's helping to facilitate, but that's not always the case. If you're using express shipments, companies like DHL, they'll have brokers that are helping sort of smaller shipments and so forth. But those people are sometimes invisible behind the scenes. And I think what I'm hoping is that one of the takeaways is seeing a broker as part of your team that is more visible and more proactive on the behalf of an SME as companies grow.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's just because something may not be noticeable to the user doesn't mean that it's not happening, and you can't just trust that it's happening. So that kind of leads to the next question in my mind, right? Why is it important for a company to engage a customs broker when bringing product into a country? What's at risk if they just try to handle it themselves? What are they potentially jeopardizing if they try to take this on their own plate?
Yeah. So, well, I should also just mention there's no legal requirement to use a broker, right? You don't have to hire a licensed U.S. Customs broker to clear your goods. You can do it yourself. But, there's the convenience. They're going to make it easier for you. They're going to assist with a reasonable care so that you understand what the requirements are and can meet those requirements. And so in terms of them acting as your intermediary, it's really having someone on your side to help navigate these customs rules. I will say that a good broker is going to be someone who anticipates issues, helps you maybe see some opportunities, and helps you manage some of these risks. I will say one risk that comes to mind is, we have the USMCA, the US Mexico Canada Agreement, which is sort of NAFTA 2.0, the revised trade agreement that was called the North American Free Trade Agreement. And just because that free trade agreement is in place doesn't mean that we can necessarily benefit from those lower duties. You will need to meet the rules of origin, which is the criteria required to benefit from lower tariffs. And if someone sees a free trade agreement, they say, oh, I'm manufacturing in the United States, I'm going to send it to Canada or Mexico, it's going to be duty-free. Or I'm sourcing something from Mexico or Canada, I want to bring it into the United States and it's going to come in duty-free because this is a free trade agreement. A broker is going to help you make sure that indeed you can take advantage of those benefits, that you can meet that rule of origin, meet that criteria, so that you are not under paying the appropriate customs duties. So just because it's made in the United States or made in Canada or made in Mexico, we have to make sure it meets these criteria. And that's really an important aspect of what a broker can do to make sure that you're not underpaying or overpaying. We don't want to see you at risk where you think you've saved all this money and tariff costs just to have customs come knocking on the door and saying, oh, we don't think that this is actually a product of the US, Canada, or Mexico, and now you owe us an upcharge. And we're going to be looking and scrutinizing your shipments a little bit more closely now. So that's one risk of sort of that cost management and cost expectation. And so yes, you're going to pay for the services of a broker, but they're going to help you manage and understand the true costs of moving that product across the border. I will say another risk is that we're seeing customs regulations become much more complex. typically, when we're working in customs, we think about customs issues as the proper classification of a product, the proper valuation of a product. Have we made sure that the appropriate elements of the cost, what CBP calls the price paid or payable, that all those elements to make the appropriate value for customs purposes have been added, and that the country of origin is that we know the country of origin for purposes of either free trade agreements or additional duties that may be applied. So those are many of the types of issues that typically you're going to get inquiries from CBP on. Again, classification, valuation, country of origin, eligibility, and a free trade agreement, for instance. Those are the typical. What we're seeing now is that there's much more complexity in customs regulations that are about the visibility and into your supply chain and the due diligence in your supply chain. Do you know where your products are coming from? Not just from your tier 1 supplier, but going back to the origin of those inputs and the processing of those products. So let me give you an example. There's a much more scrutiny on the supply chain as it relates to sourcing from China, given that there are human rights violations in parts of China, especially the Xinjiang region. There's the presumption, it's a rebuttable presumption, but there is the presumption that anything sourced from that region is made with forced labor. And products that are made whole or in part with forced labor are not permitted into the United States. There is this, we want to make sure that our supply chain takes into account human rights. So there is this much more scrutiny by CBP that you understand your supply chain, that you understand where your products are coming from. Just because it came in maybe through Canada, but it came from China, do you know where that product came from? And although a broker doesn't have that insight or intelligence, they're going to help you understand what are the rules, what are the requirements, what is CBP looking for. If you get an inquiry, how can they help you respond to CBP in a timely manner? If you're not using a broker and you're starting to source from areas that there's a lot more scrutiny on the supply chain, you may get a knock on the door from CBP and get requesting more information. So it's those risks of, sort of the cost, and are you following the rules, sort of the typical rules, and are you understanding how complex customs regulations are evolving and how we're bringing in sort of these non-traditional type of issues into border management and for goods.
Yeah, and I think it's, your point about it being an issue spotter, right? You don't know what you don't know. There are going to be blind spots. That's part of what customs brokers are there for. And even if you've been successful in the past, right, there are plenty of people who say, oh, I've been importing from this region for ages, I've got it covered. Well, the custom space is evolving and moving pretty quickly these days, like you said. So this is not a set it and forget it thing. Maybe you've skirted by before and you haven't been in compliance all this time. You just were lucky. That happens, right? They're not every shipment is going to be inspected to the nth degree, but eventually you will be. Or, hey, maybe you were in compliance until this date when this went into effect, and now all of a sudden you're not meeting the requirements anymore, and you don't know that because you're an expert in your field. That's what customs brokers really are, is, hey, they're coming in with the helping you to know this issue that is vital for your business, but you are a specialist in whatever you're a specialist in, right?
Yeah, and absolutely, and you're starting to hear more customs brokers talk to their clients to say, have you done that type of work? Have you looked at your supply chain? It may be also that you're looking at complex customs regulations and border measures in other countries on the export side. So you may need to be working with your broker or your customer's broker to make sure you understand. An example of that is the EU deforestation requirements for certain food products, certain inputs, and sort of you can't sell that product into the EU starting in 2025 if you haven't met these declaration requirements. And so again, a broker is going to help you understand what those regulations are. Because you hit the right word, the blind spots. You don't know what you don't know. and
Mhm.
that's their job to know. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So let's say there's a company, hopefully we've impressed upon them the importance of, right, engaging a customs broker. Well, all right, they're convinced. When should they begin that relationship with the customs broker? What kind of preparation should they take before starting that conversation? Hey, I need to find somebody. What do they need to do to prepare?
Yeah. So, well, as I mentioned, a lot of products coming in over the U.S. border are being cleared by brokers, right? And you just don't know it. But when you want to be proactive, and you're starting to look at the growth of your company, you're going to be you're bringing in inputs to support your manufacturing, and you're doing a lot more sourcing from overseas. That's a time when you start to think about being proactive and having a broker who understands what you're bringing in, and understands, what your needs are. Are you going to be bringing in a lot? Are you going to be increasing value and volume of shipments? Are you going to be bringing in from many different sources? Are you bringing in from countries in which there is more scrutiny? I think starting a relationship is when you start to see your company is growing to a point where you need to have more visibility on in that, if not only from the logistics perspective, but understanding how your products are clearing. And so it's sort of a sweet spot of, as you're growing, but you're not too big, and now it's an afterthought. It's part of your strategy to think about, at what point do I start to need to use a customs broker? And for us, it's typically, we have seen with SMEs, it is the afterthought, and now they have a problem, and now they need a broker. And what I'm suggesting is, think of the broker as you're growing, right? And maybe you don't need it. You don't have a lot of value or volume, and I don't know what that value or volume is for your business, but once it becomes more complex and you're getting a lot more shipments, you need to be using a broker who knows your business. You're not just reacting to, someone else clearing it. They know your products. They know what you're sourcing, and they're and this can also be on the export side. There could be some issues where you may be using a broker on the export side, and so you need to be thinking about, are they classifying your products correctly for export as well? So this is not such a clean answer. I apologize, but I think of it as that you're really it's a point when you can engage someone and tell them, these are the specs of our company, of our product. This is the value and the volume. This is our so the trade lanes we're thinking of. That's when it becomes an important element to have a broker be part of your import export team.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, I'm sure you have people with ideas, right? Hey, I want to import something. Well, what do you want to import? Oh, I just want to, like, well, you need to have a real sense of, like, this is what I want to bring in. Here's, some sourcing that I'm interested in. Here's the volume, right? Some specifics, because the customs brokers do not deal in generalities. It's a
No.
very specific industry with, product classification has been mentioned a couple of times. There's the HS code, right, which is a system by which every good in the world is categorizable under this, and it has to deal with which regulations are applied, which tariffs and duties are applied. Right. It's a very rigorous system. And so speaking in generalities, like, what do you want to import? Food. Okay, that's not a customs broker can't help with food. They can help with dates, right? Sourced from this country. I want to bring in dates. Here's the processing behind it. Okay, well, now we can start to talk about things. But at that point, right, then it becomes lots of complexity to manage of, well, where is it coming from? Is this coming from an area with any kind of issues? Is somebody that we shouldn't be trading with? How is that processed? Never mind, how does it, handled? Food stuff has its own world, which you know only too well about making it saleable in the US. Right. So I think, yeah, like some level of specificity, even if you're not currently importing, is kind of the point where it's
Yeah.
good to bring somebody in.
And I think one thing that SMEs have a tendency to do is just take at face value the tariff classification that their customer gave them if they're importing to the United States, for instance, and say, you know, dates or chocolate or a main meal or, you know, or you know, industrial goods, that they just take at face value the tariff classification that someone has given. And it's really the role of that customs broker to make sure that that they agree, right? They're clearing this on your behalf. Do you agree on the classification? And we want to classify the product correctly, not just to get a lower duty. Just having these conversations with your broker, what will you be importing? Because your broker's also, I mean, in the food space, your broker may also be acting as an intermediary with other government agencies, not just customs, right? They may be working with USDA or FDA, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, if you're bringing in toys or certain goods. You know, you work in, obviously, you know, with craft beer and wine and beverages, that if you're importing into the United States, you may have to deal with the tobacco and the the tobacco
TTB.
and the TTB,
Yes.
so it's going on. And so you have other government agencies, and so they're going to help facilitate that. And a broker will do that again, also on the export side, right? They're going to, if you're working with your customer's broker in another country, they're going to help with that and managing that sort of those other regulatory requirements, not just customs compliance.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of hammers home the point that you're mentioning before about somebody who has at least a good working knowledge of your sector, your field, right? When it comes to selecting a customs broker, there's certainly generalists and there's big houses that may have people that occupy specific lanes, but the right fit is really important because it's a big world out there. There's lots of tradable sectors. You have a specialization, maybe not to the exclusion of other things, but you are certainly a go-to for anybody in consumables.
For sure. I'll give you an example that we had a client who has 3 customs brokers. Now, they're a food manufacturer. One of the customs brokers that they have came because of an acquisition. So when they acquired another company, they got their customs broker. Then they had their own, and then they had a specialty broker that they used because it was all food, and most of the products they were bringing in were processed food products, but they also were bringing in some spices and herbs and vegetables. And this particular broker had more of a specialization on the nuances. So they were going through a process to look at how they were using their brokerage services. Did they need 3? Did they need 1? And in the end, it was, we need 2. And one being that specialty and then determining the others. So it's finding the right fit based on your industry. There are some good resources out there. Each CBP port lists different brokers that are affiliated with that port. And that's one way to do some research. There's also it's called the, I'm really good at acronyms. I'm not always good at remembering the names, but it's the NCBFAA. So the National Customs Broker Freight Forwarders Association of America, and they have a searchable website of their members, of their brokers and their specialties as well. And that's a helpful resource to see, you know, again, to your point, there are a lot of generalists, and that may be what you need, but you may need to think about someone who's just knows your sector very well and classifying products there and helping you to value those products and so forth.
Yeah, that's very helpful to know. It's just the wide world and how specialization comes to play even in the brokering space, or the custom space. So let's say you're working with a client, right, and they are preparing a shipment. They want to bring something into the market. How, I guess from your perspective, how can they equip you to help successfully bring that product, get it into the US market and in front of consumers?
Yeah. Well, there's a few more steps. So once you're engaging that broker, your broker is going to, you're going to want to have a power of attorney with your broker, right, to act in your behalf. Your broker is going to help you get a customs bond, right, to make sure that you can cover the duties for your product. If you don't have an importer of record, they may help you get an importer of record number, right? You're not already trading, they're gonna help you sort of set that up even before your first shipment. So now your orders are coming in and you're ready either to ship or to import. Typically for importing into the United States, you're going to have to share a lot of documentation with your broker. And again, that's information on the commercial invoice. You're going to need your packing list. You may need your bill of lading, your airway bill. You're going to need if you're claiming a preference in terms of a lower tariff under a free trade agreement, you're going to have to certify origin. And you might have to fill out what's called an importer security filing if it's coming by ocean. And your broker is going to help you do that. So you're going to be providing a lot of information so that they can fill out all the entry forms for you. And what's really important is that all the information aligns. What's on your invoice is on your packing list, is on your bill of lading. You're making sure that that information is consistent, because they're going to be using this entry packet of information to support clearing your products very quickly if possible. And this is information that customs will want if they're stopping to look at your products and to look at your shipments. So it's so that's the information, and you will have hopefully done that, that meet and greet and get to know us and get to know our products and look and what we're looking for, so that they can help you see things that might be off. Like, okay, you said you're bringing in dates, but the customs invoice says grapes. Let's have a conversation about what we're clearing here and what's the scope of your products, so that we make sure we're doing what's right for you. Because even though they're helping to facilitate that, the responsibility is on the importer of record. And that's the same, not only here in the United States, but that would be the same in another market. Your customer, if they're acting as the importer of record, will be responsible. I will say one other thing. I know that I'm talking a lot about importing into the United States. There are instances where you may be acting as the importer of record in another country. That would be if you are using the Incoterms DDP, so delivered duties paid. You, the exporter, you, the seller, are taking on the task of clearing customs, of paying those duties. And so you will be acting as the importer of record into that market. So you will be wanting to use a broker there too, and having those same conversations if you're going to take on that responsibility. So a lot more paperwork to provide to that broker as well.
Yeah. I think that's helpful framing for everybody, right? If there's somebody who's listening to this and says, well, I'm more interested in exporting, realize that this same conversation just happens reverse, knowing that, hey, your buyer in that foreign market, whoever's going to be importing your product there, is going to be thinking about these same issues. So making sure that you're working with them so they have the information to make sure you make that international sale right. All of these responsibilities are going to be required for every market, every transaction. And it's just, well, which side of the table are you on? Where are you in the overall flow of information? It's easy to kind of narrow that focus down to what your role is, but realize what other people need. And I think it's something that I really thought that was important that you mentioned in there too, with the getting to know them beforehand, right? You might think, oh, I've made the sale, I'm going to go engage a customs broker. Well, maybe what the terms that you've arranged the purchase, right? If you're importing something in from another market, the price that you've paid may not be workable when you realize you don't qualify for that free trade agreement, or that product is not going to be able to come in here without some kind of inspection or whatever it might be. You need to talk with your customs broker early on, at least make sure that they have a sense of what's happening, because again, issue spotter, a deal may not be workable the way that you've initially framed it out, unless you know, hey, what is it actually going to take to get it into the United States?
Yeah. I mean, products coming from China, most products coming from China are hit with what are called Section 301 tariffs, and tariffs can be as high as 25%, in addition to our non-preferential, our MFN, our standard tariff rate. So you could have a product that you think is 6% tariff, but it could be actually 31% if that product is coming from China and you have Section 301 tariffs on it. So understanding those costs for sure. They will help you spot that and
Yeah.
and know that before that deal goes through, right?
That's very, very important, right? In the end, you obviously want to sell this and have some profit left at the end. And the difference between 6 and 31% tariff might be it. That's the end of the story.
Yep.
So we talked about like some of the different roles and responsibilities in sort of facilitating an international transaction here and shipment in particular. You said like customs brokers, right? This is part of your team. What other parties should a customs broker be connected to in the process of facilitating a shipment between markets?
Well, there's going to be let's talk about the external folks first. I mean, when I think of customs is one regulatory agency, and so your broker is going to act as that facilitator with customs. But many countries have sort of a single window, so they'll again act as help to facilitate your interaction with a Department of Agriculture here into the United States or into another market, not for animal products, or the Food Authority, which would be FDA here for like cosmetics or food, Food and Drug Administration. So they're going to act as an intermediary with those partner government agencies or PGAs. So they'll be connected. They're helping to facilitate that. They're helping to facilitate information requests. So that's very much a value add. I think your customs broker should also be connected. Maybe they're definitely going to be to your logistics team internally, right? Your import-export team, which is sometimes the president of the company could be your import-export, depending on how small you are. But as you grow, that broker is going to be connected. As companies grow, you may have internally, not just as an external service provider, but you may have internally a trade compliance focused individual. So they could also be a customs broker that's working on your behalf within your company. They will help manage that relationship and will help manage the relationship internally and externally. We have a lot of clients that are sort of medium-sized that have a person within the organization that is then connecting the broker potentially to R&D, so that as we're thinking of new products, this is what we're thinking about for our tariff classification. Let's think about it so that we understand and can be strategic about it. They may be connecting to your marketing and sales folks within the organization, because if you're selling to maybe you have an affiliate overseas, and you may be talking to your marketing team about the price they want to sell the product, and we have to think about all the elements that go into the price that's crossing the border. So your customs broker may have touch points within your organization that may need to have some coordination. But typically, they're going to be interfacing with your logistics or your import-export team, and then acting as that facilitator to customs and those partner government agencies.
Will there be touches with, let's say, the shipper, right? The freight forwarder? Are there any kind of
Oh, of course,
contact
yeah, of course, and yes, I mean, I think the customs broker will that linkage to your freight forwarder, I think, is a very important one.
Mhm.
And again, some of those folks may already be embedded with your freight forwarder, but having there's a lot of sharing of information. When is that product coming in? How are you coordinating? When is that product clearing? For some products that are in the food industry, we have a lot of quotas. We have a lot of limitations on when a product may come in at a lower duty rate. And so you're working with your freight forwarder and your customs broker to try to time it so that maybe you can get within that quota, before that quota closes, and you have to pay the higher tariff rate. So there'd be coordination between your import-export team, your broker, your freight forwarder, to understand and coordinate when that product's actually coming across the border. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, this is getting to what you mentioned about the strategy side, right? It's not just, okay, I fill out this piece of paperwork and that's it, right? There's lots of ways to arrange this, and you want to do it in the best possible, set yourself up for success here, right? Have the best edge. Yeah. So I guess, right, when this goes smoothly, it can often be invisible, right? It just feels like it happens, right? That's maybe a good relationship. You gave some information, you had that conversation, and then the products move. But what are some of the more common pitfalls that you see when a company engages their customs broker when, they're trying to coordinate a shipment?
Yeah. So one I think is that sometimes companies, well, there's sort of two sides of the coin. Sometimes there's over reliance on their broker to know their products better than they do, right?
Mm,
Again, you want to be sharing that information. You may not have provided enough details for your broker to understand how to classify that product correctly. Um, you may have this over reliance that they just know your sector and you're not engaging. Um, on the flip side of that, you may and when it comes to over reliance, I think it's about, in order to make sure there's not this over reliance that they know, it's about communication, right? So you have to make sure you're communicating. And you shouldn't think of your broker as a mere transactional partner. Although they are clearing these transactions and clearing these shipments, I don't think that you should just think of them as a transactional external service provider. You should be sharing information with them on your strategy. So let me give you, like, for example, we were talking about the tariff costs. There's
mhm,
also the valuation perspective. So you may say that a product costs, $1, but you haven't taken into consideration the fact that you may have other elements. You may have a royalty fees, you may have a franchise fees, you may be using what's called an assist. And so all of these have to be factored into the value. And you haven't shared that information. There's sort of this you haven't given them enough information to help you.
mm.
And so it's really about making sure you have communication. It's not transactional. There should be a strategy. Um, and so I see that often, or that the broker then informs them of something that's happened and they don't take it seriously. If customs comes knocking and your broker has told you, you need to respond. So you need to listen to the broker as you're sort of they're your direct connection with customs if you're not getting some of those information directly from CBP. So I would say that. So it's sort of like this over reliance, not viewing them only as a transactional partner, and not really sharing enough information for them to help you. The other thing I would say is you should be pretty open as best as you can, or as comfortable as you can be, if you've had issues with customs in the past,
Mm.
right? Um, Part of the reason you may be going to a broker is because you've had shipments stopped. It's helpful for your broker to understand your compliance record, right? They're going to try to instill a culture of compliance, and they want to know if you've had some issues. They're going to help you if you know of some issues and it hasn't been yet identified by customs. They may have you do what's called a prior note, a prior disclosure, where you say to CBP, we've made a mistake and now we want to correct that mistake. We found the mistake. We want to do the right thing, and a broker can help you do that. So it's that being very transparent with your broker is something sometimes that doesn't come naturally to companies when they feel they may have not met all the rules and regulations.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Customs brokers are not there to get you. I mean, if they're recommending that, you share these mistakes with the government, it is not because, right, oh, this is certainly it's not in the broker's interest. They don't get, right, a cut of any penalty you pay or anything like that. This is in your best interest, because if you don't divulge this information, you're going to be in trouble. So it sounds like the overarching uh kind of common issue among all these pitfalls is just lack of information sharing, just not being open, right? Customs brokers need information, need the insights into what's happening in order to be effective in what they're trying to help these companies accomplish.
Yep, yep. And they'll, they want to be helpful. They want to help facilitate trade, right? And the better they do it, the better uh, the more business they may be getting from these clients. So they want to make sure that they're doing it correctly for you. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we are maybe nearing the end of our kind of questions here, and I really appreciate you sharing your expertise. But before we wrap things up, if we have an audience of, let's say, companies that are beginning to engage in international trade or looking to expand and more formalize their kind of import or export business. If you had the chance to share one piece of information that you wish that all small businesses knew about the role of customs brokers, what would that be?
Well, I think that they should be seen as an asset. They're not just a cost, but they're an asset to your business. They're an asset to the growing of your business, especially on that import side. They will help on the export as well. But in really viewing it, I will say I mentioned the words culture of compliance. And if you're really good at what you do and you've got great products and you're selling great products and you're doing everything right, you want to do it right also on that cross-border transaction. And so it's taking that same level of high quality and this is what we do well. We want to do that also in compliance. And so using a broker is one very good way to do that. And you can see them as an asset. I know some people say there's a cost, but I see it as being a valuable asset to make sure you find the right fit for a customs broker as your company grows.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you gave our audience a lot of great information to chew on here, Sean. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise with our audience in this inaugural Trade Talk webinar. If everyone just wants to follow along and stay tuned for more details on the next month's edition in the series, but I hope everyone will just join me in again thanking my guest Sean Droz of Trade Moves for sharing her time and expertise.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and I would also like to thank Sean and Chris for this informational webinar today, and thank everyone who was able to attend. You will receive an email with a link to the recording. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or via our website. We hope to see you at our next sessions. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, all.